Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying your snow day. I wanted to give you a little video just to review what we were doing in class yesterday because I know that it's a lot and I know that it can seem really confusing, but I do promise you that the more practice you do with these, the better at them you will get. I wanted to show you the method that we did yesterday just to kind of review that with a problem or two, as well as another method that you could use to factor these different trinomials. The method that we were doing yesterday I call the slip and slide. The other method that I'm going to show you is a method called factoring by grouping. So I'm going to do number one. I'm going to do it on a separate sheet of paper so you can see how they relate to one another and how they're different. And you can try to pick the best one for you. And then I'm going to ask you to do number two on your own. And then I'm going to put up another video that has me going through number two using both methods to get the right answer. But I do want you to try it on your own first before you check yourself and check your answer. All right, so on one side of my paper, I'm going to do the slip and slide. On the other, I'm going to do the grouping. So this is the one that we did yesterday. This is a different method I'm going to show you today. If you don't really care about grouping and it's going to confuse you, you don't have to watch that portion. So I'm doing number one from your notes on the You Try section. Okay, so that slip and slide method. Since there is no greatest common factor I can take out of 3x squared, negative 11x, and 10, I'm going to take my leading coefficient, or my a value, and I'm going to multiply it by my c value. And I know that 3 times 10 gives me 30. So I have the new trinomial x squared minus 11x plus 30. Now I can factor like normal with what multiplies to get 30 and what adds to get negative 11. Well, I know that negative 5 times negative 6 gives me 30, and I know that negative 5 plus negative 6 gives me my negative 11. So the two factors that I'm going to use are negative 5 and negative 6. So I have x minus 5 and x minus 6. I'm not quite done yet, because if I were to use FOIL to check my work here, I would not get that back. So you now have to take that number that you slipped and divide those two integer factors by that number, okay? So I'm going to take negative 5 and divide it by 3, and I'm going to take negative 6 and divide it by 3. I know that negative 5/3, it doesn't simplify to an integer, and I cannot simplify it further. So I'm just going to take that 3, I'm going to slide it up there next to the x and leave my minus 5 there. I see that negative 6 divided by 3, well, that will simplify to a nice integer, and negative 6 divided by 3 gives me 2, or negative 2 I should say. So there's my answer. If I were to check my work by using FOIL, I'd get my original trinomial back. So first, outer, inner, last, combine like terms, and it checks out to be okay. So now, the grouping method, you're going to see this come into play, because the grouping method, what it does is it breaks your trinomial, or whatever you're working with, it breaks it up into more terms. So I'm going to take a trinomial in the grouping method, I'm going to change it into a polynomial because it has more than, or it has exactly, 4 terms. All right, so the grouping method. It's pretty similar, not going to lie. I'm still going to take my a term and my c term, and I'm going to multiply them together to get 30. I'm still going to figure out what multiplies to get 30 and adds to get negative 11. those two terms are still -5 and -6. Okay, still -5 and -6. And you can't really see my negative there, hold on. Okay. Multiplies to get 30, adds to get -11. So I'm now just going to break this trinomial into more terms. So instead of having a -11 here, I'm going to break that into having a -5x and a -6x. So 3x squared minus 5x minus 6x plus 10. These two are still exactly the same because I could combine these like terms and get the same result. So now the grouping part comes into play. I'm going to break this polynomial into two groups. So I'm essentially going to have a binomial and another binomial, right? Two terms, two terms. And now I'm going to take each of those binomials and factor out each of their greatest common factors. So if I'm looking at this one to start with, 3x squared minus 5x, well, their coefficients don't have anything in common, but they do share an x. So I'm going to factor out an x from my first portion. Factoring out an x leaves me with 3x minus 5. Now the goal with grouping is I need to get another binomial that looks exactly like this with my other half. So now I'm going to look at my -6x plus 10. I know that I'm going to need to have a negative in the middle, and I see that -6 and 10 both have a common factor of a +2 and a -2. I'm going to go ahead and factor out a -2 because I want my binomial that I have left over after factoring that out to be 3x minus 5. The only way to do that is a negative divided by a negative and a positive divided by a negative. So factoring that -2 out, since they both do have that in common, keep my line there, -6x minus, or divided by -2 leaves me with a 3x, and a +10 divided by a -2 leaves me with a -5. Now you see that you have this and this are in common. Since they're in common, you only actually need one of them. And your second binomial is made up with your two common factors that you took out from each binomial. Got the same thing, didn't you? Right? If you look at these two, they are the exact same. So it doesn't matter which method you like better. I personally like this way better because this way you have to be really careful with what you're factoring out so that you have two common things. Now we will get into grouping things when we get later on into this unit. We will be looking at polynomials, so things with 4 terms, and how to factor those using grouping. Now, like I said yesterday, this doesn't always work. You still will have some trinomials that are prime and unfactorable. When you have those, they're prime. You can't factor them. However, if they are a quadratic, so like these both are quadratics, if they are a quadratic and they are prime, you can still technically solve for the zeros by using a quadratic formula. What are zeros? What is a quadratic formula? Don't worry, that's our next unit, so don't freak out too much about it. But now I want you to try number 2, the 8y squared minus 10y minus 3. I want you to try that. Try it on your own. I don't care what method you use. After you've tried it and got an answer, I want you to then watch the next video and see if you got it right.